this was understood to be the shroud for centuries before people could take that negative picture of it. They just believed, yeah, this is the shroud. And that shroud revealed that hidden man once photography was possible. But before people even saw that image in those details, they believed that this shroud was that. So if this is some kind of weird, bizarre forgery, I mean, that forgery was made in incredible detail that no one could even see for until the 1800s. That's really fascinating.
Oh, it is fascinating, and that alone, brought so many people to really
Yeah, yeah.
understand this as really the Shroud of Jesus. And I think we sort of, as time went on and we got into photography and so forth, that fascination dropped off. But really, it is truly the best instrument to study the shroud is the photograph, the black and white photograph. And in doing that, we discover so much about the shroud. In fact, I used the black and white. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think we should talk a little bit about as I studied this cloth, I was fascinated by everything we talked about, the blood marks being that of a crucified man, the superficiality of the image, the fact that nobody has ever been able to reproduce it. But everybody kept talking about that this must be the moment of the resurrection because of how the image was made and so forth. But I never really got into that. I said, as far as I was concerned, that there was really nothing on this cloth that could really convince me that this was the moment of the resurrection. That's the way I felt. I felt very strongly about that. Except all of a sudden one day, as I was doing a study on the blood marks of the face, I uh, I came I took I took a picture of my colleague. He was sitting at the dining room table, and I said, "No, no." I said, "I for this study." He was a volunteer. I said, "You have to be lying down. The man of the shroud is lying down." Took his photograph, and then when I got the photograph, we did our project on about the blood on the face and hair, and which is another whole story, which we can't get into today, but which of course you'll read about in the Shroud of Jesus. But uh, when I got the photographs, the negatives back, of course, those were the days of positive and negative photographs. I was very anxious to take a look at this photograph that I took of this bearded man lying down, and I felt this should look a little bit like the shroud, the face of the shroud. When I looked at it, it was just a really, it didn't look at all like it. It looks like a sort of a blank face. It didn't have the white areas around the eyes, nose, and mouth and so forth that the shroud that the shroud did not have. Shroud had these light areas around the eyes, but the image of my colleague volunteer did not. His face was all rather blank without those areas. And I said, well, there you are. There's this, what they say this is a negative, but it's not a negative. And I was very upset about all of it. And then I started going through all the rest of the negatives, and I came across another negative of my volunteer that, and that one looked very much like the shroud. It had light areas around the eyes, under the nose, and at the mouth, just like the shroud. And that was my moment. That was the epiphany of my life with regard to the Shroud of Turin, because then I realized that that's the photograph I took of the same gentleman who's sitting at the table. He was upright. So then
Oh,
I began
wow.
to realize the man of the shroud is upright. I can't believe it. No, and I was so awed by that. I had the photograph in the living
Wow.
room, and I literally backed out of the living room, realizing that all of a sudden this man is upright. And so after uh, I sort of calmed down, I came back in the room and I started to look at this, and I said, "Is there anything else on this cloth that's consistent with an upright man?" And I started looking at the chest and so forth and the hands, and they were also consistent with an upright person from the point of view of shadows. And then I said, "Is there something else on that?" And I says, "My gosh, there is something else. Look at the hair. You can see the hair. The hair actually falls all the way down to the shoulders, comes all the way down to the shoulders, but this man is upright. Then you look at the back, and the hair flows down the back, just as if this man is upright. So the hair was consistent with an upright man, and uh, and then later on, uh, uh, if you all would follow me, for example, into a hospital, into an autopsy room, or if you're working with cadavers and dissecting or whatever. And I remember when I was young in medical school, first turning over to get the body and seeing, I was just shocked to see the body was flattened. The back is flat, the buttocks is flattened, and so forth. And that's what you have when you have a dead person lying lying down. His body becomes flat out. What I did is, in order to show this to the public, I had a gentleman uh, just lying on glass, and you can see the whole back is flat. And when somebody lies down, uh, the uh, the gravity pulls that body down, pushes that body down, and the anatomy of the back side becomes flattened out. When the person stands up, you have the anatomy of the gravity pulling on the anatomy of that person, and so you have form. You but you lose form when you lie down. And when you look at the back of the shroud, you find that it isn't flattened out. That the back of the shroud has form. So that's a major statement saying that tells us that this man is not lying down, but that he is upright. So what you know, and you all the pictures are in the book, uh, the, the Shroud of Jesus. All you have to do is sort of look and study them. You can test those things out for yourself. You can put your hand on glass or lie on glass or whatever. You can see what happens to a body. So it's all reproducible. Man is upright. There's no question about it. So that, but it was even though when I saw that, I said, well, why he's upright? But I saw that his legs were actually crossed, and therefore he wasn't standing. I said, why isn't he standing if he's resurrected? Why isn't he standing? And I didn't know what to do with that, so I said, well, I didn't know who to look to or call or whatever, and I said, well, I guess I'll probably look at the Bible, so see if I find anything in the Bible. So I began reading the Bible, and I read Mark, Luke, Matthew. I didn't find anything. Then I got to John, chapter 12, verse 32, and there I read Jesus said this, and when I am lifted up above the earth, will draw people to myself. It was the exact description of what I was looking at on the shroud, and I was just floored. And I said, then of course, underneath that, it did say that he was. Well, he must have been talking. He was talking about his his crucifixion. However, I pursued that some more, and then I went to people like commentators like Raymond Brown, and I discovered Raymond Brown when he talked, and I found right away in Raymond Brown, actually in the introduction of his book, uh, that when Jesus uh, at the end of his career, when Jesus is at the end of his career, when Jesus is lifted up in in death and crucifixion, death and crucifixion and resurrection. That's the culminating event of his entire career. In other words, uh, the resurrection is the culminating event, and that's actually what you're seeing on this shroud. That changed my whole perspective, and then I knew that forensics wasn't going to work anymore. I really had to go and start to study the Bible to do this. Actually, I literally took 2 years of graduate courses in biblical studies at a seminary, and then after that, I studied the Gospel of John intently for 10 years, and the product of that work is now, in the book, and this book has been endorsed by wonderful people that understand the Bible. Scott Hahn, for example, calls this a go-to book, and Mike Aquilina Father Rocky of Relevant Radio, and others. So uh, I this is very exciting, and it tells us so much because there's so much in the Gospel of John that relates to the shroud. I could hardly believe it as I kept discovering it over these years,
Yeah.
and it's there for everybody to read about.